Welcome to Comic-Con at Home, and this is the How to Get Press Coverage for Small Press Publishers panel. And thank you for joining us here this year. I'd like my panelists to introduce themselves, if you wouldn't mind. Peter, you want to start?
Peter Breau. I'm from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. Nurse by day, freelance comic book writer by night. I write for Antarctic Press and Caliber Comics, Second Sight Publishing. I'm also the PR guy for Second Sight Publishing and editor for Quantum Visions comic book.
Tim?
I'm a writer, producer, promoter, publisher. I do stuffs, and happy to report for First Comics News. I just wrapped on a movie with Randy Couture, Dean Cain, Robert Davi called Dark Angels Demon Pit. I have an essay in the latest Valley of Light and Shadows from Huntington Press. And Modern Madness, Gateway to the Grotesque just hit its second edition. We have an interview with Clive Barker and stuff like that. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi, my name is Chris Arrant. I'm the editor, senior editor of Newsarama.com, one of the longest running sites about comics. I've been writing about comics since the early 2000s. I've wrote for everything from iFanboy, Tokyo Pop, Marvel, Entertainment Weekly, Life, and I really enjoy comics, especially independent comics.
Jason?
Hello, my name is Jason LiVecchi, and I've worked in local TV news now for well over a decade, a variety of different roles. My main role now is kind of is a video editor and photographer. I go and shoot local stories, but before that, I have years of experience as an assignment editor, which is a person who kind of organizes the different stories that are coming in from the field, local stories, and then we kind of organize them each day, and we pick which stories to send the reporters out or photographer out to go get them to bring back to our daily news. I've worked at NBC News for 4 years, that in San Diego, CW in San Diego, and now I work for KUSI News in San Diego. And I'm happy to be here with the panel. I love conventions and I love helping people get their stories out.
Thank you. Josh?
Hey, I'm Joshua Waldrop. I'm a writer and journalist and a creator on both sides of the fence as far as written for and reviewed for sites like First Comics News, Cinema Blend, several others, as well as done PR and marketing for everything from comics to local music to stand-up comedy, professional wrestling, in addition to also being a comics writer and stand-up comic, you name it. Kind of been on all sides of it.
Okay, thank you. Francis?
Hi, camera works now. I'm Francis Guy, a reporter with First Comics News. Also, kind of like Josh, been doing different aspects of things, writing reviews, mostly for First Comics News now, but also recently became a Twitch streamer. So that's been fun. But for the most part, been doing that. Also, kind of working on off and on my my comic, but just kind of become like Brian from Family Guy's novel. So it'll eventually happen.
Thank you. Alex?
Hey everyone. Like a lot of the guys here, I work kind of like on both sides of the fence. By day, I'm a publicist, entertainment publicist, and work with a lot of different clients who are trying to build their brands. But I've also dabbled on the other side of doing reviews and doing news pieces as well.
Thank you. My name is Rik Offenberger. I write for First Comics News. I've worked with Chris at Newsarama and at Comic Book Resources at one point. We've been doing this panel for a little while. We do this because we love independent comics, and we want to help share some of our ideas and what to do and what not to do that has worked to help get coverage for your project. If you're a small press publisher, you don't have a PR team usually, and as a result, you're not exactly sure how to get coverage. Once you create your project and put it together, that's really just the start of the work, because no one knows it exists. And if you're going to do a Kickstarter, if you're going to try and get it into the Diamond catalog, if you're going to try and get some coverage so people buy it, you have to know when to market it, how to market it, and who to market it to. And that varies quite a bit. And usually the first step people try and do is figure out what to do next after they create their comic, because they're creative and they don't really think about how to get it into the hands of people. And that's probably the biggest challenge in the whole process, is to get readers. Does anyone have any ideas of what works well for them when someone submits something?
Well, I would think just in general, just strategizing, just to start with, just like what you said, after you come up with your concept and you start get the ball rolling on the creative end, just start strategizing for everything. I mean, there's from getting your ducks in a row from press releases and everything to getting a bio and press kits, everything. Just be ready to hit the ground running. I would say strategy is the biggest thing you could do to start reaching out to people and make your product seen and heard.
Yeah, I agree. Strategy, make sure, you know, a nice organized press release. You know what, I'm always going to talk from my angle is just local news, like local TV news is where I come from. So, you know, sometimes less is more. You know, a lot of times we'll get an email that's got, you know, 3 pages long and we're cycling through so many pages, you know, just to make sure the point I always want to get across the beginning of this panel is just, you know, just make sure when it comes to local TV news, just have one, 2 sentences, the who, what, where, when, and why, and a contact number. From my angle, that's a good jumping point off. And don't be afraid of rejection. That's like not rejection, but no response back.
Now, how hungry is local news to cover a comic project or any, you know?
On the weekends, you know, it wouldn't be that unheard of to cover a story. I mean, our station has got like 4 hours of news to create each day, and we've got obviously limited staff. But if it makes point in that on that day, you know, let's just say it's an anniversary of Superman, and you've got, you know, Superman type comic book, you might want to, you know, you could pitch it. But yeah, I've covered stories at comic book stores, comic book openings, book signings. You know, comic book signings. I've gone to those things. So that's more along the lines of what would get us to you.
Yeah, speaking to that, one thing that helps a lot, because you just going back to the rejection or not hearing back thing, you got to realize how much you're up against as far as trying to make your thing stand out, and how many, just on sheer volume, press releases and things like that a lot of these news outlets get. So to stand out above that and not get your query or your promotion lost, you have to bring the same creativity that you brought to your project, to promoting your project. And if you can find a way to make it some sort of an event or seem like some sort of an event, it's always perception, or some sort of bigger deal than it is, then that's going to help you immensely standing out from other people who just send in their thing and wait.
Also, I always say this every year. It's always with people too, it's how much passion you put into it. Is the energy you give out with your project is what people are going to give back to you. So if you're just going to go, here's a press release, here's my comic, end of story, why should, like Josh or anyone else, why should they care what they get? If you don't care, why should we care? And also now, before maybe even going to that level of going, okay, I give myself out to the press, to news outlets, to whatever, is right now, I mean, a lot of times hit the ground running, I would say, you know, at the conventions, but the world has changed this past year. What we're doing is now, like I've seen with Twitch now, or things on Instagram or TikTok, is now people, it's like they got to get to know you. Or they think they know you. Early example I've had was a band called I Am Ghost, and Steve Giuliano was a lead singer. He would actually go to to shows and say, hey, my name's Steve, I'm in this band, and then the blah blah blah, and, you know, talk about it and say how, you know, what it's about, and get into it with conversations with people. And they'd see his band, go, hey, I know that guy, and they would go to his shows. First show they played, they were signed to Epitaph Records back in the day. And so now that aspect has to be going digitally. You have to be able to say, like, you know, when they see you playing video games or eating In and Out in California, people go, oh, I love In and Out. Oh, I'm gonna check this out. Or Josh, they see what he's wearing is like a Austin kind of replica shirt. Go, oh, this guy loves wrestling. Oh, Lapel, yeah, I know I know Johnny Bowles. I know who that guy is, and they're going to be more compelled to get to know you, get to look at your product. It's a lot of relatability now too. So the world has changed, and yeah, after this is done, this aspect is still going to be there very strongly. So I would suggest maybe trying to find your niche in that market, either be TikTok, Twitter, or Instagram, Facebook, whatever.
It's something we talk about every year, but now it seems like this year it's even more relevant. Like what you were saying, Fran, it's all relationship building. Like if you just send your press release or send your project to somebody you've never even talked to before, and then you just sit back and cross your arms and wait for them to get back to you, I mean, the odds are you're not going to hear anything back, or you might get a polite yes, whatever. But if whoever you're trying to get to promote your thing, whether it's, and that's a big part of it too, is knowing who you're sending your thing to. If you've written a horror comic and you're sending it to an editor or a reviewer who doesn't necessarily cover horror versus another person you've noticed that's kind of their thing, then you obviously want to try to plinko yourself down to the lowest common denominator as far as what people are going to be receptive to. But it's all relationship building. You're building relationships to the people you want to promote your project. You're building relationships with the people you want to buy and support your project. And a lot of that now, like Francis said, it's all this. It's podcasts, it's YouTube shows, building up your own fan base, your own core, and creating your own community building along with relationship building. It's following other creators on their social media and interacting with them and helping promote their stuff, and not with the cynical kind of idea of like, oh, I'm going to promote your stuff so you promote my stuff, but an authentic, real enthusiasm and excitement for their thing, because that enthusiasm builds and they're going to be more likely to notice, and also if they like what you're doing, support your thing and share it with their audience.
You actually touched on something that's kind of important there, is that I see a lot on Twitter, writers who will share their content and say, hey, I just wrote a piece for, this website, this blog or whatever. And as a publicist, I'm always following all these different people, but it's also engaging with those people. So they kind of, not necessarily for my own reasons, but the content that they're writing, I'm usually interested in. So engaging with them, like you said, builds that relationship. And, when the time comes, I'm say, hey, I got a project or I have a client who has a project that you might be interested in. They might be more receptive because they've already established a relationship of who I am.
The relationship is exactly perfect. Yeah. Because I've covered stories where, open air markets are opening back up again a little bit and things like that. And open air markets were stayed open actually. And when I go to them to get a simple, 30 to 45 second story for the evening newscast for the weekend news, and I see someone I know, the girl that's selling the yoga pants that I'm friends with, I'm going to get her interview. I'm going to get the shot of her booth when there's 30 booths there, but it's like, I know her. So yeah, it's just, and she didn't, and maybe she did it tactfully. I don't know, but but I was friendly enough with her where I said, oh, hey, oh yeah, perfect. Can I get a quick soundbite with you and have a quick little couple of shots of your booth? And I could have chose any one of those booths. So relationship is huge for sure.
Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah, going back to what Josh was saying, I think especially for trying to get journalists and press outlets to cover, it's about understanding those people and what they're looking for and what stands out to them, because ultimately you're trying to convince them that your project is frankly worth their time. And instead of trying to get them to do it your way, I think especially when you're really trying to make a impact, is understanding what they do and trying to figure out the best way to fit into their plans. Another key thing is kind of valuing your own time and resources and figuring out the best way to spend an hour of your time. Like if you are going back to what someone else says, a press release is key and it's an overlooked thing. But one thing with a press release, if you got a good press release, is get it out to as many people as possible. You should, a good mailing list, even for independent comics, should be at least 300 to 400, possibly more. That's even before considering retailers, because there's in addition to comics websites, comics podcasts, comics conventions, local impacts, local TV news. Like they all want to do a story of a local person makes a comic. That's always a different like angle. But then going deeper and targeting that, for instance, say you have a horror comic, you must like horror to some degree, but doing a research to see what people write about horror or do podcasts about horror comics, and maybe just personalizing not the press release, but just something above the press release to kind of get the door in for them. Because from the other side, Rik can vouch for me on this, is like people that run these websites get several hundred press releases each month. Some get several hundred a day. So how do you stand out from that? How do you make it where they decide to do yours and not someone else's? And the ultimate key is, if you have a great comic, it makes everything else a lot easier. But there's always been great comics that aren't marketed well and just kind of come and go. So like, I think it starts with a great comic, but then understanding your audience, if it's a journalist, but ultimately if it's the readers, and how to communicate with them. And it's almost working backwards to determine, well, these press people, where do they go to find news stories? And I should try to get to those places instead of trying to remake the wheel and try to get them to adapt what they do to fit what you want to do.
When, as you say, I get over 300 emails a day. I used to say 300, now it's well over. I have no idea how many it is, but they come on my phone and and on my PC, and I go through them all. I delete most, and there's a ton of spam in there. I'm usually looking for someone who has an attached image as opposed to an embedded image in the PDF, just because it's easier to put up on the website. A lot of the stuff people use isn't as friendly to us at the other end, and they don't know that. But a lot of the embedded stuff that looks cool in the email becomes almost impossible to cut up and spend the time on if it's a small project that we only have marginal interest in. But I think the real key is network building, for any project, and knowing who your audience is. If you're selling through Diamond, your audience is not the customer, although it will be at some point. Your audience is the retailer. And so you've got to pitch it in such a way that a retailer wants to order your book. And if you're a small press publisher, you're hoping to sell 3 to 10 to a retailer. You're not looking to sell hundreds like Marvel does. And so you have to look appealing enough that you stand out, so they look for you in the catalog, because they may overlook you in the catalog. And so then 3 months later, you want to come back with another marketing campaign to market to the reader, so the retailer sells your book. And if they sell your book, they'll reorder. If it's still on the shelf when it comes time to reorder, they're not going to reorder your book. No matter how much passion you put in it, no matter how well you marketed it, it's really, it's a business, and it's how they pay their bills. So you have to know who your audience is each time. You have to know if it's the media is your audience. You have to know if the retailer is your audience. You have to know who the audience, if the fans are your audience, and you have to adjust your pitch to them. And for the internet, you have to adjust your pitch to each website that you're pitching to, because everyone has different specialties. And the more you can get into a subgenre, if you write a zombie book, pitching it to everyone is important, but pitching it to zombie related sites is much more important, because that's where you'll build your audience. And you need to build an audience to get more readers for the next project too. If you aren't growing, you're going to be done pretty fast. So each time you come out, you need to have a larger and larger number, which is not the way it usually works at Marvel and DC, where the first issue is real big. And then after that, they see diminished returns on 2s, 3s, and 4s till they build a stable audience. As an independent, you need to be growing your audience each time, or you're going to die.
I wanted to touch upon something that Rik brought up, this idea of new, and it's harder to get people on board after the newness is worn off. If you're getting retailers to buy your comic, if you're getting press to cover your comic, if you're getting readers into it. The number one mistake I see people make in marketing comics is rushing out the comics before they've had time to market it to its fullest potential. Yeah, there is value in marketing after the book is out, and there is a long tail at conventions and things like that when you can actually sell the book, but getting all your ducks in a row to have it set up So there's press and marketing before the book comes out, and the in some cases a year before, months before, days before, day of, the week of release. Like those are all key points that once the book is out, you can't go back and redo it. Like if you put it out in a new format, like say you release it just on Kickstarter and then you come back later and you release it to the direct market later, that's still not new. It's new to a different market, but it's old for people that have already to many people it's old. It's something past. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but going back to what I said, like one of the biggest mistakes I see is people are rushing out the book before they've had time to market it so it can allow it to be a success.
Peter, how do you market
One of the
your
things
stuff?
about
Well, before we get into Diamond, that second site, what we were doing is we would do what Chris was saying. We would try to build an audience first and get the hype out there about the product that we have. We would start with like different campaigns on different platforms and try to get as much word of mouth out there too about our product. But once we get into Diamond, things change that way. Now Diamond tends to take care of a lot of that. So now we're doing what you were saying, Rick, about now we're approaching the retailers, because we're a small independent company that, we don't have the muscle that Marvel or DC has or the long reach. So we try to build a relationships with each one of the stores. We try to have different incentive covers, and try to personalize things. Like at one point we had some of our creators were writing like handwritten notes to the retailers to show their appreciation and stuff like that. So we try to be unique and new. And I know this stuff has all been done before and it's been done by everybody else. And we're trying to find our own little niche in there. We tag ourselves as the future of independent comics, and we are the future of independent comics here at Second Sight. But as a freelance writer myself, what I try to do is I also try to have sneak peeks every now and then on Facebook of what I have coming out for upcoming projects, and I try to get some word of mouth going on. And I'm a firm believer that a rising tide raises all ships. So I find if I lift up everybody around me, then it lifts me up at the same time. I try to always praise the team I'm working with, like praise the people at Second Sight, like Bradley Golden and Marcus and Spike, and just keep going as best as we can.
You as a potential comic book publisher, or as a small press publisher, you have to be prepared to sell your product.
Yes.
And I say that, and some of you are going to snicker at this or think, but it's really true. We were at Comic-Con, and my son bought a comic called Anne Frankenstein, and you get the joke, and he liked it a lot. And then the next year he bought another copy of the next issue. And I met with the guy who created it, and I thought, we'll give him some press because, my son liked it for no other reason. And he doesn't have a website. He doesn't have a place that you can go to purchase it unless you're standing in front of him at a convention. And, and I've seen him for a few years, and this has always been true. And so even if we wanted to give him press, he's not prepared to sell the book to anyone who isn't standing in front of him. And so you have to make sure that you have, when you send out your press release, when you're doing your publicity, if you're going through Diamond, you tell them when it's going to be on sale. If you're doing a Kickstarter, you tell them when your Kickstarter is going to launch and include a link. If you have, if your Kickstarter is ongoing, you give them a link. If you've got a website, you give a link to the website so that people can go to your website and see what you've got, and do some of the work for you. And you just really have to be, thinking about what you're actually doing more than just being a creator.
Going off of what Rick was saying, I actually had a comic that I was interested in that was even worse. They had a website where you could order the comic book. And so I ordered myself the first issue, paid for it. It never came. And finally, months later, I got an email from a guy, the creator of the comic book, who told me that nobody ever buys any comics, so I never checked this. Here, let me just reimburse you your money back. So I never even got the comic. I got the money back that I spent to try to support his comic because he gave up but didn't take the website down or the link. What? The other thing I would mention, since nobody else touched on this, is I've always been a huge fan of blurbs. I'm the guy who has always sought out writers and celebrities and creative people that I want to work with. And then I've never been afraid to say, hey, this is who I am and here's what I have going on. And because of that, I've established relationships with people who either were further ahead in the business than I was, or at the time was around my level and now are way ahead of me in the industry. And I have these blurbs and comments and that relationship. So I would encourage people to not be afraid to reach out to people, because what's the worst case scenario? You end up where you are now, where you don't know them, or you make a connection that could help your career out.
Tim and Rick are both kind of speaking to. Oh, go ahead.
A modern day version of blurb is not even getting a blurb to put on the back of your comic or put in your press release, but getting somebody you know to talk about it on their social media feed. Yeah. And having that link to a website where, unlike Tim's, where they actually fulfill the orders, like that kind of instant.
That old thing.
Yeah, it can happen in a day, and that might be more powerful than putting it on your book, where people have to buy your book or see your book to get the blurb. But if these people who have an audience that is similar to the audience you're trying to attract, then if you can get that blurb, Rick was talking about a zombie book. Robert Kirkman's pretty busy, but imagine if you get like Charlie Adler or like even one of the actors TV show to do a blurb for your book, or even just to retweet a tweet that you did about your book that gets that out there. That's the modern day blurb and kind of getting it out there. But you have to be, again, going back to Rick said, be prepared for success. Like once you get the book out there, it's a totally different job, and it's a challenging job to be a publisher, to have your books on sale and available. Because if you burn a person, they'll remember the book that they ordered and didn't get more than they'll remember why they wanted to order the book in the first place.
One of the rules in retail in general is that if you make a satisfied customer, they'll tell 3 people. And if you make a dissatisfied customer, they'll tell 10. So for every person you upset, it takes 3 happy customers just to balance out. And so if you give bad service to someone who you're trying to sell your comic to, they'll tell 10 people. And those are 10 people who potentially might have bought your product. They're obviously people in the same community who have the same interests. So they were all potential customers. And so it's really important to be there for good customer service, to take care of people, to interact with people. It's important to interact with them if you're doing a Kickstarter, during the Kickstarter, after the Kickstarter. As you're doing the fulfillment, make sure people know what's going on. You took their money, and that's no joke. And you got to be prepared to explain what you're doing and when you're doing it and how you're doing it, and if there's a delay and why, so that people feel like you're honest and upfront with them. Be honest, and if something goes wrong, tell them. Don't hide it, because people need to know that you have some integrity.
An important part of what you guys are talking about too is first impressions. Like whoever that comic creator was that didn't fulfill that comic for Tim, awful first impression, because the next time Tim sees that name on a Kickstarter or another project, he's probably not going to be as apt to support it. And that first impression doesn't only start with your preparedness to sell your product to potential customers, but it's in getting it out to news sites or reviewers, anybody that's on this panel. I'm sure all of us can relate to having gotten an email of like, oh, hey, I've got this new great comic. It's about this, this, and this, and I would love for you to promote it for me. And you go, sure. You see some artwork, you have a cover, a title. Oh, it's, not quite. Don't have that down yet. It's just more of an idea right now. It's like, well, you can't promote someone else's idea. You have to have something ready to show, and knowing when you're ready to actually reach out to these people and try to get them to promote. Don't do that prematurely. because then that's the first impression they're going to have of you. Oh, this is the person who's not ready at all. So if I see them email me again, I probably will ignore that email versus and pay more attention to one of the other 300 plus emails you're getting a day.
And those good impressions can really pay off. Like, I've been covering comics probably too long to mention a number, but I have relationships with people, and I know, not in a pejorative way, but I know who's always up to do an interview, who's always up to give me a quote, and who is harder to reach, and who is maybe over promises in what they can do. And that's not pejorative, but that's just a judgment. So I don't let that factor into what we cover and what we don't per se, but that is in my mind in terms of, hey, this person is going to be available to do an interview, or hey, this person is going to be able, like if I ask them for preview pages, they're going to be able to get that to me in a day or less. But like, key thing is being ready when you are, like, what the focus of this is about getting press is when you are reaching out to get press, be ready for the obvious questions that are going to be asked to basically get that information back to them. You can give excuses to why it wasn't given back to them, but they'd much rather just get the stuff ready, have everything ready, have a link to your book, reduce the barriers to entry for people to find out about your book, have the preview pages, know ahead of time who is available from your book's creative team to do interviews and who is not, how they are able to do interviews, email interviews, phone interviews, Skype interviews, what have you. It's just being, what Rik is going out to, being ready for success and being prepared, because press sometimes moves pretty quickly, and if you can't get it to them pretty quickly, when you do eventually get it to them, the situation may have changed, and their schedule may have changed, staffing may have changed, or just the week you get it back to them, they may be busier than they were before and can't give you the coverage that they hope to give you when they initially said, hey, let's do something.
Yeah, and for God's sakes, be nice about it. I mean, nobody owes you their time to look at your project. So don't send an email with your press release or whatever else and then not hear back in a week and shoot back an email or on social media like, what the hell, bro? You know, it's like, it sounds simple, but it's that whole more flies with honey, you know, than vinegar type of thing. It's like, you're asking somebody to kind of do you a favor by promoting your, you know, your thing. So be courteous about it. How you represent yourself, whether you represent yourself as a professional or not, goes a long way. And being, you know, nice and understanding of the person's time that you're asking to help you promote your thing goes a long way. Conversely, coming at somebody with an entitlement or with the you know, rude attitude, like they owe you something, also goes a long way towards making sure that person's never going to want to do anything for you.
You have
also,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Also, going back on that, and also what you said, Rik, if you look at Yelp, you look at Amazon, any of those kind of reviews, I'm going to kind of simplify it for some people, is that no matter how many, you can get 20, oh, I love this product, but always sticks out to you is that one star review for some reason, 1 or 2 star review of like, that's terrible, it's terrible. And then that kind of happens to everybody else. But also going on, before you start any of this, the second you start this, I've heard Josh say this before, I'm going to credit you, Josh, is that once you start your project, guess what? You've promoted yourself. You are now your own PR person. You're your own vendor. You're your own, you know, you name it. That's where you start. And also now the way people are more cynical with press is if you keep saying this stuff, what the F, bro? Hey, you know, you're not covering my stuff. You might get an article about yourself saying, hey, this person sent me this article, check it out. And it's just going to be like, dude, you're a laughing stock. They're not going to want to look. They're going to see that your product now go, I don't want to look at that. The guy's a jerk. I don't want to read it.
With email etiquette, one, assume that if they don't respond to you, that it went to their spam folder, it was accidentally deleted. Both of those have happened to me. You know, or not necessarily that they don't want to cover your stuff. Also, don't send your entire comic or graphic novel as a PDF in the email to fill up their mailbox without telling them and getting permission to send it first. If you want to send a few preview pages, a cover, and a write-up, everyone's excited to see that. If those are sent as attachments, that's a plus. But if you want to send a link where we can download it to a Dropbox or something like that, that always works. But you know, with the quantity of mail we get, we don't necessarily need you know, an enormous file that takes forever to download on our phone and stops us from getting all of our other mail. And you know, just really be polite to the people at the other end of the email.
I would say the other thing is, if you're going to spend some money to promote properly, be prepared for that second wave, know what to do. I had a client of mine use a PR wire service to do a really big press release blast. And so she spent, you know, like in the neighborhood of $5,000 to do this big worldwide blast. And because of that, she got a response from, you know, hundreds of different places that were willing to talk to her immediately, and she did nothing. And then about a month or so later, she messaged me, "Hey, what should I do about this? How should I respond?" And I was just so annoyed. I'm like, how can you be this? Anyway, don't be that person, please, for the love of God.
And
there is now more than ever, there's independent press companies out there specializing in getting press for your comics. Probably the most popular is Superfan, run by David Hyde. He's the ex-VP of press for DC, but there's several other companies that are out there that you don't need them for your entire comic campaign if you don't have the budget, but hire them for the initial announcement and kind of getting you over that initial hump. And they, in most cases, will give you plans that you can then carry through yourself later on. It's kind of like hiring, basically paying someone to, I don't know, do your landscaping the first time and then show you how to do it. So you can kind of do it, not as good as them, but you can do a good job after the fact. It does cost money, but they are experts in this, and they have all these contacts already built up. They have these relationships already set up, and even bigger places do it. That, like he was, like, I'll say this on record, Mike Mignola does Hellboy through Dark Horse, and they have their own PR department, but Mike also uses David Hyde to do additional PR. These big companies like Scott Snyder's Noctera. Scott Snyder is a pretty big name. I think anybody that goes to a comic store knows Scott Snyder is. Even he hired an outside PR company to help him with that Kickstarter. He hired professionals, and yes, he's operating with a larger budget than most, like any of us, like the people we're talking to are. But there is a lot of different comics PR places out there that can give you kind of this starter campaign to get you through that initial launch. We can also help you set realistic expectations about what you can do, just so you don't set yourself up for disappointment.
I want to plug local news there.
The thing about the PR companies, it is true, because I can think of 5 of them off the top of my head that I deal with regularly. And there are a few that are smaller that I deal with occasionally. But when they contact me and they send me an email and we run a preview, and then they contact me again and say, well, let's do an interview, I have a relationship with the person who sent me the email. And I have a long-term relationship with that person. So when they say, can you do an interview for my client, I may not have been inclined initially. No offense to anyone, it just may not have been something I was interested in, but because of my relationship with the PR person, I'll say, okay. And that may be fair or not fair to some of the small press people, because you do pay for this service, but you are getting something from it. And so that does help.
And what I was just about to say before is, I want to, like, you don't have to, you obviously, it's great to hire someone new, but I'll just give you, anybody listening, a jumping off point or a starting point. Know your 5 local news stations. I want to plug the local news stations. Know that there's an actual email address, there's an actual phone number, and there's actually people on the other end that are getting paid from 4 a.m. to after the 11 o'clock news at 11:30 to read these emails, to answer the phone calls. And if you know those 5, I mean, it's such a simple place to start, and just to know your 5 local news stations or emails, and there's a specific assignment desk, an assignment editor, which I used to be, and I still do fill in every once in a while at the desk. I'll pick up the phone and stuff like that and field phone calls. But that's a thing you could do today, right now. Just get those down and know where to send your information to. So
yeah, because creating comics is a pretty distinct and unique path, and especially for local news, we get TV, newspaper, local radio stations, like even those little, sometimes those little weekly papers that some places have, they cover a lot of news that's the same for them. They cover government hearings and another car wreck and stuff like that. So hey, someone in town has got a comic, and hey, I don't know, they're a friend of a friend of a friend, or their mom works at my grocery store or whatever. Those kind of connections, you can't manufacture that. Like if you can set up things like that, that local angle is key. But also through that, ideally, is you want to set up a place where these locals, once they see that story, can go and get your comic. Like if you have a local comic store, you need to have that relationship where like even if they don't want to buy it outright and resell, if there's a consignment deal set up, just places where they can go and buy the comic once you get the press. But yeah, a local press is key and unique, and that's kind of the next step beyond like, hey, getting my family members to buy my comic. Is, hey, getting my local community, if not buy your comic, just be aware of it, because there may be other opportunities that come as a result of them being aware that there's a comic creator in town.
You also have the chance, if you get some local press, to set it up with your local comic shop to sell on commission or on consignment and to do a signing. And I mean, I did a Kickstarter last year, and we did $4,000, but we only sold 130 comics. It's not a huge number. If you could go to your local comic book store then and sell 13 units, you have a 10% increase. You know, it doesn't, and you know, so everything helps.
Well, also one of the things where local media comes in really handy is you're talking about setting up like a signing at the local shop or something like that. And it's not just relegated to local news. You should be thinking in these terms, even in a more broad space as far as podcasts and message boards and things like that. But things that may be tangentially related subject wise or theme wise or message wise to your project, but that doesn't necessarily aim for the bullseye as far as comics related, like comic shops or whatnot. We had somebody come to one of these panels at a WonderCon, and they had a horror based comic, and they were based here in Orange County, California. Now in this area, LA, Orange County, it's a hotbed for like independent haunted houses, like Halloween themed conventions and things like that. And that was an avenue that this person who had this horror comic hadn't thought about going in to promote his comic. But if you can find something that has a synergy with what you're doing, like this person who wrote a horror comic and going to horror themed or horror enthusiast groups that aren't necessarily comics related, but haunted house related, or the Halloween store related, or cosplay related, or things like that, then you potentially open yourself up to little pockets of communities who would be happy to support your comic, because maybe your comic is the only comic in that kind of realm or in that genre. We had another person come to one of these panels one year, and they had a comic that featured, I think it was somebody with a character with Down syndrome. So one of the suggestions that was made to him was, well, have you contacted any local, support groups in your area, any social groups for people with Down syndrome or whatnot, and maybe you can go make a presentation or go make a speech as to why you thought that was an important thing to highlight in your comic book. And then, not aside from supporting whatever that cause or whatever that theme is that meant enough to you to write a comic about it or do an independent film about it or whatnot, you open yourself up to that community and that support base that may be more than happy to support your comic if they knew it existed.
I think accurately, analyzing what your comic is from a marketing standpoint, knowing what the angles are, it's like, yes, you want to, if you have a certain type of comic, you want to sell market it to comics. But if it has the angle, like say Down syndrome, there was last year a horror comic that involved being diabetic, and they approached comic stores about that and comics press, but they also approached it to diabetic support groups and stuff like that. But it has to be done in an honest way that's not demeaning to that different angle of being diabetic. And a local, going back to what I said, is also another angle. But basically being able to approach that and going to what Joshua was saying about, instead of being one comic among a bunch of other comics, being either a comic convention or comics press. Like imagine if you went to a, I don't know, local book festival where they're selling nonfiction books, prose books, stuff like that, and you're the only comic there. Then if anybody wants comics, you're going to be the person there. Is the comic isn't the one thing that defines your project. Hopefully there's other angles. Maybe it's a comic about a firefighter. Maybe it's a comic about knitting. Maybe it's a comic about sailing. Like I would almost as equally promote it as a comic to comic places, but as a sailing to sailing events, sailing museums, things like that. There's all different sorts of avenues, and there's a lot of ideas. So go back to what I said, like comic creating is one job, marketing your comic is a completely different job, and it's having respect for that and kind of knowing what's the best use of your time. You only have so many hours a day, so trying to figure out, yeah, I could do 100 things at a certain level, but maybe there's 5 things that if I do really well about, it'll make a lot more difference. And choosing what those 5 things are to do, put your 100% towards it, and instead of trying to spread your time and doing a little bit of everything.
I think it's really important to.
We had a panelist before who did a Bigfoot comic, and he promoted them at Bigfoot conventions and people who like that type of stuff. And I have a friend who does a faith-based comic, and he sells it at the mall in a Christian bookstore in just a little corner. And he's not selling it online. He doesn't have a website, but all his sales come from a Christian bookstore that, so there are a lot of places where you can find like-minded people that want to promote your product if your product is a little different or has a niche.
I was going to mention that Josh Henneman with the Bigfoot comic, didn't he? I can't believe I'm blanking on the name of his publishing label, but it was something related to craft brews, right?
Yeah, Brewhouse Comics. Brewhouse
Comics. So one of the things he did was he went after craft brew communities, Facebook groups and things like that were craft beer enthusiasts. And hey, I've got this comic label that's inspired by like this, my love for craft brews. And that's an entire market of people, maybe not 100% of them would be stoked to read a comic that's made by somebody who's a craft beer enthusiast, but if 10% of them, 5% of them are, that's still not insignificant number of people.
I was going to say it's really important for people to know how to handle rejection and not take it personally because you never know what the producer is doing on the other end. One of my buddies is Tawala Sharp, who is the producer of the Mo Kelly Show on KFI AM 640. He also does Nerdorama, and sometimes I'll pitch him ideas he uses. Sometimes I'll pitch him ideas he doesn't use. And the other day I pitched him a friend of mine who is running a Kickstarter, and this is what he said. He said, "Peace, brother Tim, not feeling the vibe on this one, gonna have to pass." And I was like, it's my friend. But what I said was, I gotcha, understood, and he responded, "When it comes from you, I'll always give it due consideration." So if I responded by like, "Hey, come on, man," or like, "You owe me one," or whatever, it would have been a whole different, but they sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't, whatever.
We've pretty much hit our allotted time for the Comic-Con. So I'm going to let everyone say goodbye and plug their stuff one last time. Chris, you want to start?
Yeah, you can find me on Newsarama, which is a part of Games Radar, pretty much 5 days a week, sometimes 6 or 7 on busy weekends. I also have a Twitter account that's just under my name, Chris Arrant, and you can find me there.
Tim?
I'm working with Andrew Bowser on his Kickstarter, onyxthemovie.com, onyxthemovie.com, onyxthemovie.com.
Jason?
Jason LiVecchi, local TV news guy. I've got really nothing to plug except just kind of support your local community. I'm a big fan of local stories. I I truly love them a lot, from local bookstore signings up into the national news that happens to be in my region. So that's it.
Francis?
Yeah, Francis Sky over at First Comics News. Check out some articles. Also, Twitch TV/Viva La Fran. If you want to check me out playing video games. Not say I'm the best, but we have some fun. So come check it out in the Frando.
Thank you. Josh?
Joshua Waldrop. You can follow me on all the social medias at SoCal Franchise. That's SoCalFranchize. Right now, my website, joshuawaldrop.com, is being revamped, and keep an eye out for all things Red Gorilla. That's my production brand, GUERRILLA, Red Gorilla. And soon to be, first time I've mentioned it publicly, Ultima Digital. I'll have more on that later.
Peter?
I want to share a story about local news coverage first before I shamelessly promote some of my stuff. I wrote a story a few years ago, a comic book story involving Lord Greystoke being in St. John, New Brunswick here, visiting for the royal tour involving Prince Albert before he became King of England. And it was carried by the local newspaper here, the Telegraph Journal. But because things are online now, somebody who was from St. John, New Brunswick, who lived in Tarzana, California, was browsing through, reading the local newspaper, which a lot of people who live locally, who don't live locally, always check out the local news. They always want to know what's going on in their hometown. And he read the little press release that was carried by the local paper and brought it to somebody that he knew who worked for the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate. And the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate reached out to me and wanted copies of the comic book and wanted it to be archived in their archives, which was a pretty big deal for me. And it kind of, then that little local press got covered by the fact that ERB wanted to archive the comic, and then provincial press wanted to talk to me, and other people wanted to talk to me because of this one little local news story that somebody who wasn't local but wanted to remember local and feel local was reading local, right? So yeah, you never know who's reading the local newspapers online. You never know who's watching local news. But now I'll shamelessly promote myself. I am a freelance writer. I do write for Second Sight Publishing, and coming out for Second Sight, we got Harvest of Horrors. I have a story in here with my son, Jaden. It's a World War I horror story. We got Mississippi Zombie coming out that I have a storyline in this with artist Harrison Wood, which I want to make a little dedication to. Harrison just passed away a few days ago. I got the news. He's an artist from Tim's place there, Las Vegas. And I'd like to dedicate, this to him. Harrison just passed away a few days ago. I am doing another story with John Apple, and all I've got is this art to show off. It's called Shadows of the Dance. It's going to be in the Quantum Visions anthology. I got I have another story coming out here. It's you can see that. It's Atom Man. This is with Phil Williams Jr. And this is another one that I got coming out. This is also good. This is going to be in the next issue of Harvest of Horrors. It's by myself and my son and Brian Makish. And so yeah, that's what I got going on. I got a few other projects coming up too, but I don't have anything that I can really talk about right now. But grateful to be on the panel. Learned a lot.
Thank you. Alex?
I'm everywhere, but home base is pretty much Twitter at Monstar PR, Instagram at Monstar PR, all that stuff. And yeah, hopefully I have some more exciting stuff to talk about in the coming months.
Thank you. And again, my name was Rik Offenberger. I'm with First Comics News and G-Man Comics. We have a Kickstarter ongoing right now that will end on Tuesday the 30th. So if you want to take a look at that, you better hurry because we're almost finished now. But thank you for your time, and we enjoyed helping you all out.